Louise.
Thank you, and thank you for your lovely talk. It's so great to hear about hats. It's a subject that's massively forgotten about, I think, when we think of costumes. So thank you. So I'm going to make a start. What road are you taking? Said the Bisou. The Needles Road or the Pins Road? The Needles Road, said the little girl. Well, I shall take the Pins Road. The little girl enjoyed herself picking up the needles. This is from an oral tale of Little Red Riding Hood from Dundee's 1989. In 2012, while looking for some haberdashery, I uncovered a gathering of 170 plus items of dress in a cupboard in the fashion department at Birmingham City University. Research undertaken of the objects revealed that some of the dress had been bequeathed by Kate Elizabeth Bunce. This is some of her work in the centre, the Birmingham-based Pre-Raphaelite artist. The discovery of these sartorial treasures formed the catalyst for my enrolment onto a practice-based PhD at London College of Fashion. When selecting my objects of study for my practice-based PhD at London College of Fashion, the Red Cloak emerged as one of the objects I selected to study. Labelled with L. Bunce, as you can see on the image on the left, and Birmingham School of Art, it forms part of the Bunce Gathering, which was donated to the School of Art in 1927. The Red Cloak offered me a sympathetic vibration between the individual and me, the object, rendering the cloak an evocative object. As a costume practitioner with a professional background in historical costume and a practice-based researcher, I'm employing object-based study as one of the methods. My background as a maker of historical dress transitions its study and the analysis of the objects into an embodied practice. Within this paper, I'm arguing that the thing power of the Red Cloak is legible without the spectator engaging in the methods I outline. I am proposing that the Red Cloak is inscribed with feminine agency that has had the power to disrupt for many years. Moreover, I argue that the Red Cloak has become a material meme. Material, adopted from material culture, and meme, adapted from Dawkins' development of his meme in his text, The Selfish Gene. Dawkins' discussion of a meme's propagation of themselves by leaping from brain to brain via a process called imitation is pertinent to the enduring agency of the Red Cloak and its adoption as a costume of protest following the screening of and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale in 2017. The transgressive nature of the Red Cloak was legible far before its adoption in The Handmaid's Tale. I'm arguing that it had agency before its adoption in Atwood and Crabtree's Handmaid's Tale. In Notes of the Trials and Tribulations of Little Red Riding Hood, Jack Zipes writes that Sidney Aldall Addy, an English author of books on folklore and superstitions, recorded that in parts of England, witches were, quote, dressed exactly like fairies. They wear a red mantle and hood, which covers the whole body. They always wear these hoods. An old woman living in Holmesfield in the parish of Dronfield in Derbyshire, who wore one of those hoods, called Little Red Riding Hoods, used to be called the Old Witch. The Red Cloak's agency and thing power was never more visible or visceral than in Anne Crabtree's handmaid's costume design of white wings and a red cloak in Hulu TV's adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale. Atwood and Crabtree dressed the handmaids within Gilead, a totalitarian patriarchal state, in a uniform that included the Red Cloak, bearing a striking resemblance to the Red Cloak I am studying. The title of this paper and quote, A Sister Dripped in Blood, Atwood 2017, page 9, reiterates the cultural associations of the colour red and the corporeality of the handmaid's role as reproductive vessels in Gilead. The adoption of the handmaid's costumes following the success of Hulu Productions' version of The Handmaid's Tale to represent the struggle many women face to gain control over their reproductive rights has enabled women to find power in a uniform that was meant to hinder them and imprison them. That's a quote by Anne Crabtree. A lifelong interest in fairy tales and stories was the stimulus for the cloak selection as one of my objects of study for my PhD. The thing power of the cloak and its visual links to Little Red Riding Hood's cloak was dependent upon the collaboration, cooperation, or interactive interference of many bodies and forces, Bennett, 2009. However, research of the Bunce family indicated a family interest in fairy tales, myths, and legends. John Thackeray Bunce's published Christmas Holiday Lectures, Fairy Tale, Their Origin and Meaning, 1877 and 2005, and Kate Bunce's library catalogue, BU 31, in the Cadbury's Research Library, informed early research and reading of the cloak. The catalogue listing of the books kept in the family residence at Priory Road, Birmingham. Amongst Thackeray Bunce's Christmas lectures and the Bunce sisters' catalogue of books, there feature myths, legends, and fairy tales. However, it is important to locate my positionality or vantage point as somebody invested within fairy tale. After all, who is Little Red Riding Hood without her cloak? In Bill Delaney's paper, Perrault's Little Red Riding Hood, Delaney writes that the little girl is called Little Red Riding Hood because she wears that famous garment all the time. Aoife Monk's discussion in her paper Collecting Ghosts, Actors, Anecdotes and Objects at the Theatre of the Skull in Hamlet is pertinent to the discussion here. Monks describes the infamous skull as a secret talisman in systems of superstition and familial inheritance on and off the stage. I am proposing that the talismanic agency outlined by Monks is legible in The Handmaid's Tale, and that this agency transitioned the red cloak into a garment of protest. Red cloaks were a ubiquitous item of dress for men and women in the 18th and 19th century. Its prevalence is evidenced through paintings from the period by artists who immortalised the costume, including George Morland, William Redmore Bigg, and Francis Wheatley. Human beings and objects, quote, human beings and objects are indeed bound together in a collusion in which objects take on a certain density, an emotional value, what might be called presence. The practice of undertaking object-based study of the cloak has privileged exploration of its many histories through slow-looking, Mider and Kim, and material culture analysis, Prown. Holtman and Prown, in their introduction to American artifacts, Essays in Material Culture, assert that material culture analysis, the vibration between object and individual, offers the potential for the individual to uncover some significant meaning in that particular object, which relates well to my rationale for selecting the object. An established professional background in theatre, working with story, character and identity communicated through dress, and a lifelong passion for fairy tale has undoubtedly been the catalyst for my research on the cloak. Researching the cloak, I've been privileged to have access to the object itself, supporting the study, analysis, and also comparison of the cloak with other examples of the red cloaks at Bath Fashion Museum and Leicester Museum's costume collection, some of which you see here in this slide. Neither collection had anything similar to the demure, everyday Bunce cloak that I had in my possession. It appears that the type of cloak I have in the Bunce collection very rarely survives because of its ubiquity across the 19th century. Interestingly, the cloak in my possession bears very few marks of wear. It has some indication of wear at the neck, but overall it appears to have been worn for either a short time or only for occasional wear. The lack of wear may indicate its use within the Bunce studio as an object to draw from, its retention within the hat, but initially maybe a reminder of a favourite aunt, for example, Louisa Bunce. Interestingly, Kate Bunce's sister, Myra's middle name was Louisa, and through research undertaken, I discovered that there was an aunt, Louisa Bunce. Of the many fairy tales included in Thackeray Bunce lectures, the Little Red Riding Hood, as one of the most popular tales, may further support its retention within the Bunce household. The red cloak is constructed using a summer weight wool with white silk binding. It has some unusual seam lines at the hem, possibly indicative of the wool fabric's narrow width and the maker's need to use the fabric economically. The hood is a simple design featuring a narrow strip of silk fed through a channel to draw the hood up around the face. There is nothing particularly decorative on the cloak aside from the binding, and the simplicity and economy visible on the cloak indicate a sartorial restraint. The cloak is hand sewn and the raw edges are finished with a whip stitch, a stitch commonly used in tailoring and costume practices. In his text, The Trials and Tribulations of Little Red Riding Hood, Jack Zipes charts the cloak's development from a hood in Perrault's original tale to the cloak that contemporary audiences are more familiar with. Zipes suggests that the red cloak worn by Little Red Riding Hood in Perrault's tale was indicative of vanity. The colour red's association with sin, sensuality, and the devil again locates the character of both Little Red Riding Hood, the cloak I find myself studying, and possibly Atwood and Crantrup's use of the cloak for their Handmaid's Tale. The adoption of the handmaid's costume in 2017 and 18 by women protesting against the state's, quote, requisitioning of women's bodies, Atwood 2018, reinforces the costume's power. It marks the red cloak as having a disruptive agency. Diana Young, in her chapter, The Colour of Things, discusses colour as agentive and capable of affecting events and transformations. She also discusses the stickiness of highly saturated colours and how red specifically is endowed with dynamic properties and with magical powers. Catherine Orenstein writes how Perrault cloaked his heroine in red, the colour of harlots, scandals, and blood, symbolising her sin and foreshadowing her fate. The redness of the object, a favourite colour of many, and its ability to saturate our senses and ignite us emotionally, Gonera 2014, is significant to the red cloak's ongoing pervasiveness within visual culture and society. In my art education, I was taught that red is utilised compositionally to draw the eye around the image. It is used as a device to attract and draw the viewer's eye. At a distance, it is far more visible than other primary colours. It is culturally associated with blood, lust, passion, sexuality, and it marks the object, in this case, a cloak and the wearer. Used within Hulu's Handmaid's Tale, I'm just scooting back one to remind you all, the colour makes the handmaids more visible than, for example, the wives in their teal green coloured garments. The evolution of the infamous Red Riding Hood within the varying versions of the tale indicates that its popularity as a tale and the object's agency made it subject to adoption for earlier political causes. Within Germany, Little Red Riding Hood became Little Red Cap, and Jane Browning Smith, in her translation of Ludwig Tieck's text, The Life and Death of Little Red Riding Hood, A Tragedy, 1851, quote, made the stylish French chaperon from Perrault's into a cap, drawing parallels to the mode of wearing Republican or Jacobite caps in honour of the French Revolution. Interestingly, that the garment's adoption to indicate political revolt in Browning Smith and Tieck's text, although possibly coincidental, adds weight to my argument that the red cloak is a material meme. Its adoption as an iconic object in a popular tale for political purposes indicates that its agency was recognised long before its adoption in The Handmaid's Tale and its subsequent use in protests for women's reproductive rights. So this is quite interesting here with a quote about Little Red Riding Hood, little cap, red cap, and then we see the Phrygian cap here. This paper has argued that the red cloak is a material meme and has agency beyond its original intended purpose as a garment to cover and protect. I argue that its agency was recognised long before its use in The Handmaid's Tale, and that as an object, it represents transgressive female voices. Adopting the red cloak as part of the handmaid's costume in Atwood's original Text and Hulu Productions TV series used tropes that existed long before both the book and the series. My serendipitous study of the red cloak, which coincided with the protests in 2017 and 18, utilising The Handmaid's Tale, and as part of the cloak, served to spotlight the object's agency. As Anne Crabtree noted in an interview with Emma Fraser in May 2018, clothing that is intended to isolate the women of Gilead is being used to amplify voices across the world. Crabtree's use of the term amplification concerning the costume's adoption in the protests is pertinent to my argument of the cloak's historical transgressive agency. The red cloak's agency and legibility, marking it as a material meme. Thank you very much.